Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me to talk about a very different topic. The topic is related, but a very different method and very different approach. So I'm Shlomo Dubnov, and I'm Director of the Center for Research in Entertainment and Learning. And so I'm going actually to talk about cross-cultural analysis, metaphors, and AI. Okay. So just a little bit about where I come from. So my appointment is actually in the music department, computer music area, and also I'm affiliated with computer science. I'm a machine learning person in my official training, but also have a composition degree. So I do a lot of machine learning, specifically on music and audio, but also in other domains. So Structure of Style, one of the books that I co-edited, deals a lot also with text and with even architecture and other domains, cross-cultural communications, and this is really what our center is about, is extending the aspects of machine learning, AI, to other cultural assets, and a couple more just background information. So as a musician or creator, we also had here in next room, actually in QI, about a little bit more than 10 years ago, we produced, I don't have to call it an opera or show, a multimedia presentation. It was an hour long. You can see it on UCSD TV, dealing with stories of destruction, Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So we're exploring aspects of Talmudic text, exegesis, and how we can understand actually historical / cultural narratives in different ways. So that was kind of theater in the round with discussions. And of course, the way we do Pilpul versus, let's say, Tafsir. There's so many different cultural aspects to the way we actually read text and understand it in the way that kind of guides us in culture. I'll skip. Yeah. And just another aspect of our cross-cultural understanding. Yes, we had recently a symposium trying actually to see how we can use AI for tolerance and understanding in the Middle East with colleagues from UAE, Georgetown. So this is part of the mission, I would say, of our center. So why Exodus? So of course, first of all, because Tom asked me to. And then, of course, in terms of the significance of this text as a case study, it's one of the most enduring liberation narratives. And of course, it has its resonances on Jewish, Christian, Islamic, and many more traditions, and of course, African American and Zionist. So, how we can judge it? So, when I approach the text, I think the Yenu from the Haggadah gives a good idea that it's not just the Exodus in the sense of like exiting from. It has all of these steps, Yetzianu Mitzrayim, which means, okay, that's the actual kind of Exodus, but then give us the Shabbat, give us the Torah, and then let us enter the land of Israel, right? So the story or the book of Exodus is a sequence of actually liberation activities, or it's a process. And then the question would be, well, can we use any of the AI data science tools to find deeper connection between the story of Exodus and other references, later cultural references, and how we go from surface of words to actually the meaning. And the meaning would be probably liberty, justice, education, whatever other people would kind of consider or refer to Exodus. So the text we took were the original Exodus, and I apologize for the dating, because I learned here that the dates are probably very, I don't know if off, but much more complicated, right? So the book of Exodus, if I assume it's around the 5th century BCE or 6th century BCE, almost 1,000 years later, we have the Islamic retelling of Exodus. Then another 1,000 years, we jump into the American abolitionists, Frederick Douglass. So we use this text, narrative of his life. Theodore Herzl, same time approximately, wrote a novel, right? It's Alt-Neuland is not really even like a political text or ideological text, but it actually has this Zionist visionary in it. Martin Luther King with his "I have been to the mountaintops," so even the title suggests that there is an aspect of this getting to the promised land. And we kind of wanted to pair this with interpretation, and I'll mention this in a second, with Isaiah Berlin, a philosopher of liberty, because if Exodus is about liberty, let's see what other people speak or say about liberty as a philosophical, political concept. So what we did is really use large language models, if you want, like LLMs. ChatGPT is one of them. And that allows us basically to look into text just as numbers. LLMs embed, or so-called represent, chunks of text as these very high-dimensional numbers or vectors. And then we can try to visualize them in a lower-dimensional space. So in this case, it's 3 dimensions, and we wanted to compare these texts. So book is the book of Exodus, then we have the Surah, Friedrichs, MLK, Herzl, and the themes. So let me kind of briefly try to make this a little bit more interactive. So this is what we have here, okay, as this text cube. And again, it's cube just because otherwise I couldn't visualize this. We had to choose the dimensions. And let me just kind of start from nothing here, okay? So if we just take the book of Exodus in that space, whatever that means, we don't know frankly what it means, okay? Is located here, and then if we look at the Quran, it's actually a separate set of points. Then if we look at Frederick Douglass, another set of points, kind of unrelated, at least in these 3 principal dimensions. I'll jump to Herzl, okay? He's somewhere there in between, maybe, and MLK is the set of purple points. So it's kind of, at least roughly speaking, on your right, maybe you have the more religious or ancient texts. On the left, there are the modern texts, and these modern texts are also kind of have their own separate view, okay? Now, to try to understand this a little bit better, and instead of, well, we can try to zoom in, it doesn't really make much difference. And these are, every dot is just a segment of a text. So, because these are long texts, so we chunk them, and then we do the LLM embedding and plot it. So to try to understand what they are, we throw in like an anchors themes. These would be words that I insert and will be placed there. So we can try to see that, the texts on the left, the modern ones, talk about moral uncertainty, struggle, freedom, historical memory, while the religious ones are the ones who kind of talk about voice of God, obedience, which is natural. I mean, that's one is a religious text, one is much modern, more of a narrative text. So that kind of, the question was, all right, so we can see that, but we at least assign some deeper meaning to this thing. So can we actually find that additional meaning, okay? So what we did is actually consider the metaphor theory, saying that we cannot treat the text in its literal way. We actually have to find some way to map these abstract ideas into concepts, and the concepts we chose, because I mentioned Berlin, were the concepts of liberty. So the conceptual metaphor theory and this geometry of thought, well, it's all geometrical, really, allows us to map things, unrelated things. We actually can map with metaphor also across domains, and I'll show in a second. We also used this before, so I extend this idea to text and interpretation of Exodus, but the techniques itself of contrastive learning actually allows us to take these so-called metaphorical pairs, where the idea is you basically bind or combine 2 separate concepts or 2 separate data sets and try to say, well, whatever is similar should be similar, whatever is different should be far away, and that's how you create these metaphorical mappings. So, frankly, metaphor is a cognitive model, okay? Some people call it an imaginary extension that allows understanding of abstract concepts in terms of our daily experience or common, could be also cultural experiences. it grounds and biases possibly towards specific stereotypes. Jack Balkin called it cultural software because a lot of these common experiences could be culturally generated. And it can go as far as psychoanalysis and Jacques Lacan. So Richard is not here, but he said he's Freudian, so I kind of included that. Okay. But I would say it's not only that. Even mathematics is considered, at least George Lakoff wrote in their book, Where Mathematics Comes From, Understanding Mathematics Requires Mastering of Extensive Networks of Metaphorical Blends. So as an example of other metaphorical mappings we did before, for instance, when we want our AI to generate music for poetry, like this Rilke poem, we actually have our own. Actually, one of the early diffusion models for music is ours from 3 years ago, 2023. Now you have commercial software that does that way better. But the same way you use diffusion for images, where you prompt it with text and you get an image, we have the same thing that does this with music. But the musical prompts have to be a little bit more specific. So when you want to go from something so abstract as a poem to musical prompts to generate basically like an automatic music rendering of Maria Rilke's poem, you have to do this metaphorical mapping because there is nothing musical in that poem. You have to translate this to some kind of a musical imagery that then will be prompting our methods that would basically generate music with a specific style. Or if you want to interpret graphical scores, and this is an actual score, that's contemporary music. We're a music department, experimental music. This is musical piece, okay? If you're wondering what it is, okay? It's not a painting. It's actually a piece by Cornelis Cardew, and we actually got an award for having an AI interpret that piece, okay? So how do you interpret this? It's metaphorical. There's nothing really mapping here. This doesn't mean anything. There is no even if you try to find like music theory in it, and maybe there's some kind of suggestions, that's all interpretations of textures and movement and stuff like that. So if I can convince you that metaphor actually is something very important, and it kind of complements, because a lot of these contrastive methods are actually sometimes called semantic mappings. Okay, so if you do these contrastive learning on, let's say, not music but general audio, or those who maybe have heard about CLIP, which is this language image retraining, or you show an image and suddenly you have like an automatic caption that explains you what's in the image or what's in the sound, you would call it semantics because, it understood it, right? But when you do this between abstract texts, that's not semantics. It's some description. And I claim that the best word I can use for this is metaphor. So if we want to map, let's say, philosophical concepts that we borrow from Berlin and text in EXODUS, so one is literary, one is conceptual. So if we say, let's make people go, I can say, well, that's freedom from coercion, right? Or what he calls sometimes negative freedom. Or maybe that's related to Douglas' liberty from bondage. When you give the Torah, well, that's something. Maybe it's freedom through education, through something, through accepting. Or going to promised land could be anything like MLK's, I've been to the mountaintop, which is getting to the civil rights promise, or maybe for Herzl, it means Zionism. So when we do this, we actually created these metaphorical mappings. I will not list here the whole table of these kind of pairings that we did. But once you do this, you actually have this process where you take these pairings, you train some kind of another neural network, whatever that means, that now basically pulls whatever texts are together, this philosophical text and the literary text. And then you can kind of go through that filter and look again into the same distribution. So now, actually, we have the surah. If we go through this contrastive model space, without going into any details of like how it's done, but the contrastive using these metaphorical pairs, we see that Surah and Exodus, the Tanakh version, are much closer related, okay? And then the modern texts also are way closer, although we do observe slightly different distributions. So Herzl is the blue one on, I would say, maybe a little bit more to the right and bottom, while Friedrich Douglass is maybe more to the left and up, and kind of MLK maybe in the middle. And the other thing is you can take the edge points and try to see what the text is talking about, and that kind of helps us try to interpret this. So one of the interpretations that we see is really that kind of the lower left seems to be the basic freedom, okay, the idea of the text mentions, unhampered liberty, freedom. When you go to the right, it starts talking maybe about education in our mapping, so maybe Torah and education. And then if we go to the top, it maybe talks a little bit more about truth, so it's maybe more the ethical aspects of these spaces. Now, I'm not claiming that this is any kind of like proof or universal thing, but it kind of seems to make sense when we look at these texts and we think about Douglass, who is more concerned with truth and moral aspects of liberty. Herzl, in that, actually used the last book of his, Altneuland, where he kind of arrives back to the promised land and sees this utopic place where everybody is coexisting and education and prosperity is there. He's not actually even talking about anything political there. MLK, I think he does mention kind of a little bit of both, while Exodus and Surah, they're religious texts. So in that sense, the aspect of divine instruction, following the divine law, I think is much more present there. Now, can we extend this? And so I kind of added, I actually ran through the presentations quickly, because if you have seen I have the video running on one of the exhibits at the back corridor there. So following, Richard Friedman's and the other presentations here, I kind of decided, I'll get a little bit more, I don't know if polemic or speculative, but I thought, can we extend this metaphorical access to J, E, D, and P? And this is more of me speculating now with you, and I will be happy to have any comments. But it seems that one way to think about these periods is also in the way what message they try to convey. So Yahwist maybe reflects more of a personal, narrative-driven God who liberates you as a person, while, the E, the Elohim, maybe is more remote, distant, and maybe more like a moral thing. Deuteronomy, legalistic, priestly, ritualistic. So one way to look at these texts is not only in terms of its chronological development or basically the hypothesis of the evolution of text, but also evolution of the message. Okay, and the message is really cultural message. So can we extend this to others? So we kind of tried to look at Isaiah Berlin for this presentation, but maybe, talking about other philosophers, you can look at, Michael Walzer, where he talks about this whole procession from Egypt and Sinai as an example of its political metaphor, justice. Levinas, more of existentialist approach. Hannah Arendt talking about totalitarian approach. I mean, you can try to map the same story to very different moral kind of representations, which are in a sense metaphorical. Okay, so that's kind of a possible extension of this whole thing, where you could actually create much more access and different ways to analyze text, and maybe the GEDP could be this kind of metadata that helps us understand not so much the origin of the text or whether it's historically true, where it appeared, but it's more like what impact it has on us when we try to use this text as a reference, and we have in mind a certain political or philosophical theory that we feel that is actually representative of what we would like us to see the world like, okay? So that's kind of just as an example. Well, basic contrastive setting would be, we take a biblical text as the literal text, then the positive, which would be that pairing. So sometimes these pairs are called anchor and the positive example. So the other map, the other side of this map is some kind of a conceptual metaphorical expression. And then the goal is basically to embed these or try to understand these texts in the context of other texts that give that interpretation. Okay, well, I think I have time. I just was maybe a little bit speeding up. Kind of that's, again, the motivation try to see what shared meaning texts convey across style, era, metaphors that can unite text or show divergence in text. It seems that in the text that I analyzed for the conference, we had this universal thread of transformation, freedom, identity, maybe destiny. I think AI can help reveal how all the stories relate. When I say speak to us, means how they relate to things that we think about them today. And not talking about any relativistic truth, but just saying that it helps us to understand that what we consider true is actually could be anchored in foundational stories and then reinterpreted through specific later thinkers. And then, and by the way, in the list of people kind of we mentioned here, in some sense, there is a whole other list that I could add, which would be names of streets in Tel Aviv, which would be Had Ha'am and maybe Jabotinsky, right? And this would be very different because all of these authors, in some sense, are exilic in the 20th century sense, okay? And they're all a little bit more progressive, so they don't see that narrative of Exodus the same way Had Ha'am would see it, or Jabotinsky would see it, or even later, Rav Kook. So you actually see that you can render very different meanings based on the way you consider the significance of very kind of deep concepts that we might not be aware of. So, so at this point, kind of just going back to the big motivation of if metaphors could be considered as cultural software, so if we want to use this VAI, I'm just summarizing the metaphorical mappings and metonymic thinking. So one is mapping, one is thinking. There's an interesting, I wouldn't say duality, but finesse between metaphor and metonym. Using stereotypes could be also adverse because you might be overgeneralizing and biasing, but they do have significant ideological effects because they kind of highlight or suppress certain features of reality according to what social conventions are or what your even political beliefs are. So they can act as cultural heuristics, and they help us understand new concepts in terms of things that we already comprehend. Now, if we want to talk about AI fairness and mediation, kind of relating maybe to that slide we had with my UAE colleagues, where we feel that maybe AI is not used in a correct way, so we must consider tolerance and I could call epistemic humility in machine-mediated communication, basically acknowledging that the way you represent meaning is very different based on what reference you want to derive from it. And speaking about countering effects, it's not only about fairness or preventing hate words or fake. It's really, if you want to counter a metaphor's power, you not only need to deconstruct the first one, showing that it's not logical, but also you have to offer another compelling metaphorical representation or mode. So if you want to build AI tools trained on curated corpus of religious, philosophical, and media text that could represent this plurality of cultural and ethnical and ethical traditions. So as a bonus, I don't know if it'll play. If not, I'll switch. On that presentation, because I said that I'm my main or my other hat is musical. This is the opening and the ending of that video. Is this song of Miriam? Okay, I knew it wouldn't play. Sung by. Let me see. Can I play it from here? Let's see if I can. So, let me see if it plays here. No, the audio is not working. Just a second. Let me try. Of course, why would for somebody who's in the music department would know how to work the audio here, right? Okay, let me see. Let's try it. Ooh, I don't know why it's clicking so much. Okay, you'll have to go to the hallway, put the headphones. It's actually we took a cantillation of the Song of Miriam and faked her voice from a very short recording of her. This recording is also very nice because it kind of says, like, she welcomes. This is her talking like for less than a minute. It's like 30 seconds of her advertising her film, okay, and we use that voice, and now we could make her sing whatever we want. So I asked her to sing the Song of Miriam. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. So thank you. Yeah.
We have 5 minutes. Does anyone have questions for Shlomo? I think we have time for both of you guys. So if you want to come up closer to the microphone, that'd be great.
I really enjoyed the talk. I'm really fascinated by this interdisciplinary meeting of the computer science field and the humanities, digital humanities and so forth. The way I understand this project is, we're trying to find thematic similarity between these different texts, right? So, in a way, in an effort to kind of objectivize these comparisons, right? The field of comparative literature, the field of comparative religion, to kind of objectivize these comparisons, right? Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
no.
Shall I answer? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no. There is an arbitrariness to this mapping. I mean, in the sense that I'm not trying to say that there are thematic correspondences. These are very different texts. Okay. The Exodus and MLK's or Herzl's texts are actually not related. If you look at them in the language space, okay, they are related in some kind of a, I wouldn't say neglected or hidden or far away subspace that you need to navigate to find that similarity. So what metaphor does is actually create like a filter that tells you, well, actually, I take these representations and I twist them and shift them, and now, because I say this means this and this means that, and I choose these mappings, then you can see these similarities in different ways. Now, if I choose another metaphoric mapping, maybe other texts will be close to each other and other texts will be far away from each other. So it's really that kind of what I call relativity of truth. It's in a sense like if you believe in a certain ideology or certain concepts, and now you decide how you map specific texts to these concepts, it affects how you understand other texts as well.
Right. Yeah, because that's what I was wondering, right? Because the meaning you would attach to certain words and certain verses is very
my
subjective.
choice.
Yeah.
Is my
and
choice, right?
Depends on the translation you choose as well, right?
Yeah,
So,
no, definitely. So there is this arbitrariness, but I think this arbitrariness goes also through our education systems, what you told people how you interpret these texts. I mean, we might say, or believe that we're just teaching that text, but we teach it with some interpretation, and that creates that mapping of meanings, and then it also projects to other texts, other domains.
Because I was thinking, suppose the word freedom, right, very relevant to the Exodus.
Right.
The word freedom means a very different thing in a Rousseauian sense, and then American Constitution sense, and modern liberalism. Very different meanings, right? Same word. Might use different translations, but the same word. Then if you put the same meaning, then it will clump all of these texts together. And
Right. No. So that's an excellent point. It's arbitrary in a way. It's arbitrary in the sense that you have to decide what kind of worldview you have, what are the meanings, map it, and you usually map it to some kind of another. So one is narrative, one is conceptual, or one is literary, one is kind of more philosophical. Once you establish this relation, that affects how you would understand any other text as well.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, of course. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Very interesting work, Shlomo. Really.
Thank you.
So one question I have is, if I'm not clear on how you did the training of this model, but if this is using some large language model that has been trained on documents that exist today, then it will be trained based on modern English text.
Right.
And you're applying it to texts that may be religious that have a different construction because they're based on more ancient text. So I'm wondering, what is the difference between, or what are the effects of using modern text training on a large language model to analyze these older texts?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I can tell because I used English versions for all of the texts. Okay, so I had an English translation. I think it was King James Bible actually, and then Surah, whatever on the website was translation from Arabic. Okay, all of them were basically not in their original language. Well, except for the English ones, which are MLK and Frederick Douglass. So yeah, and I was using an existing pre-trained model. Okay, one of the ChatGPTs. So what I did is just the contrastive learning on that mapping. Okay,